All right, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. The May 19, 2009 special joint meeting of the City Council and the Redevelopment Agency is called to order. This meeting has been properly noticed and posted in compliance with the open meeting law. These proceedings are being presented live on KCLV Cable Channel 2 and are closed captioned for our hearing impaired viewers. This special council meeting, as well as all other KCLV programming, can be viewed on the Internet at www.lasvegasnevada.gov. The proceedings will be rebroadcast Thursday at 12 p.m., on Friday at 4 p.m., Saturday at 5 a.m., and the following Sunday at 10 p.m. As you all know, the building is protected by a state-of-the-art fire detection and suppression sprinkler system, so should alarms activate, please leave through the exits and wait until our marshals tell you it's safe to re-enter the building. Now, before we move on our agenda, would everyone please stand for the pledge? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Madam Clerk, may the record reflect that Councilwoman Tarkanian, Councilman Steinman, and Councilman Ross are excused from today's meeting. Mr. Vincent.
Good morning.
Let me call the item, please. This will be item number 4, a public hearing and possible action regarding fiscal year 2010 City of Las Vegas tentative budget and fiscal year 2010 City of Las Vegas final budget, including the 5-year capital improvement plan. This is a public hearing which is now declared open. Mr. Vincent.
Good morning, Your Honor, Counsel. Mark Vincent, the acting Deputy City Manager for the City of Las Vegas. A couple of weeks I get back to being CFO. We have had quite an interesting winter spring with all of you, and actually for the last 12 months it's been very interesting. We've been briefing you quite a bit. I don't think there's a week that goes by in our briefings that we're not talking about some financial issue. I know that the City Manager Betsy Fretlow has made this one of her focuses as we try to get through this kind of lengthening recession period. I guess what I'm saying is we have kept you pretty much informed. We've briefed you almost on a weekly basis. The budget that we're going to go through today, essentially it has no changes to it from an expenditure and a CIP standpoint from what we presented to you back at the budget workshop. In other words, the things that we've already briefed you on, the capital projects we've briefed you on, the departmental expenditures are pretty much as we have briefed you, and we'll go through that. So that's sort of the framework that I wanted to start with. This sad-looking page is some of the recent stats from the CBER snapshot, the UNLV Center for Business and Economic Research. And just to kind of highlight some of these, we know these. We've been looking at these stats. The economy is, I don't want to say it's unprecedented, but certainly in my lifetime I haven't seen this kind of a situation, and so we're all struggling with this, and obviously the other local governments are as well as the state and the nation. But unemployment has risen. A year ago it was about 5.2%. Now it's at 10.4%. I mean, it's actually doubled. When we look at some of our residential valuation and commercial valuation in terms of building permits, those are down 70 and 80%. Sales tax.
Does that mean the number of permits that are being sought?
The dollar value of
the dollar value of the homes?
On the permits. On the permits.
On the permits.
Yeah. So, and that's a direct correlation to our property tax values. That's why I'm looking at dollar valuation as opposed to the number of permits. Apartment vacancies, interesting, were up last month. Passenger counts are down 12%. Gaming revenue down 10%. Convention attendance down 30% for this last period. So things, as we've told you in briefings, while there are some signals nationally that maybe there's a little bit of fluctuation which might signal a bottoming out for the nation, it appears to us that here in Las Vegas we still haven't felt the bottom quite yet, and that and when we do kind of bottom out, that our recovery will likely lag the national recovery, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a second. I want to remind everybody, you all are keenly aware of this because we've been briefing on this, but perhaps for the public that may not be aware, we started our corrective action last year in 2008. We started tightening up our vacant position management. We actually cut some funding out of our budget. We initiated the fundamental service review in 2009, which was a great tool for us to plan for fiscal year 10 and get prepared for fiscal year 11. We initiated a compensation and classification study, which is not completed, but we think that will be helpful for us, particularly as we begin to move forward with some of our contract negotiations and some of our management of our resources, our labor resources. We've initiated some fee enhancement changes. In fact, you'll be seeing a couple bills on tomorrow that are introductory on the business license fees and that are essentially set primarily as cost recovery fees for the most part, although there are some license increases scheduled in there as well. We've also created and funded, with your help, a revenue stabilization fund, the first time we've done that, which is going to help us here in the short term. We had a very successful voluntary separation program that paid for itself, that will allow us to save approximately $6.5 million in fiscal year 11, so that was successful. We've conducted 2 revenue reviews at your request last October, actually before last October, because we had a meeting in August and we just had a meeting a few weeks ago. We created a committee of outside experts in finance and government finance, both private and government finance, and we've convened twice. Things drastically changed from 9 months ago when we met with them. I shouldn't say drastically changed, but some of us were a little more optimistic than others, and things have, as I said, have not bottomed out. So they've made some recommended adjustments to our future revenue. Those adjustments primarily occurred in fiscal year 11 in our forecasting. We had already agreed to make some adjustments on our C-Tax numbers for 2009 that are going to impact us as well. So that was a huge thing for us. I think our shortfall is a little bit larger. It's about $70 million larger over the 5 years than we had previously told you, and that's as a direct result of this review with these outside fiscal experts. We've also successfully negotiated some labor contract changes. We're very thankful for that. Over the next 5 years, we think that those changes will save us about $19–20 million. We've also froze executive compensation not only for this current fiscal year, but we're also proposing in this budget to freeze it, executive compensation in terms of merits and bonuses. And, of course, executives don't get CPI increases either under current policies. So we've frozen executive compensation for the current year and plan to freeze it again for next year. So that's kind of some of the things we've been doing all along, and this has had some significant impact for us in terms of our budget. We've reported to you in the past that, and briefed you, and I think we talked about it at the March workshop, that we've actually cut our costs by about 9% already. We did that principally without having to do too many reductions in force. I think all told, the people that actually lost their jobs because of because of a reduction in force and lack of any bumping rights or a position to go to have been less than 10 over the last 12 months, when in fact we've reduced our force by almost 318 positions. So that's a good thing. We've been able to manage that well. The problem is, of course, that as this slide indicates, the revenue picture for us as a city is not turning around much. Amazing to me, as we looked for the growth for the last 5 years from 2006 to fiscal year 2011, our average growth rate for that 5-year period is going to be negative, and slightly negative. It's almost flat. But to have a 5-year period where there is no growth in revenues, when our expenditures and our labor contracts are growing, it's going to be very testy for us. And we're, as we've said, we're about 3 years into that 5-year cycle, and so we've got another year to go. We think we've got some time to put together a plan, but we'll be talking about that in a little bit. Specifically, as a result of the adjustments we made from the Financial Review Committee and some of the recent information that we've seen coming from the state on our consolidated tax distribution, we're looking at a negative growth of 3.5% for the current fiscal year 2009, and we're looking at negative growth in 2011 at 2.1%. So that means fiscal year 12 becomes our bottoming out year, and we start to see a recovery in 13 and 14, which I think is about a year delayed from where we thought we might be, in about 12 months prior. Specifically with respect to the general fund, our budget is going to sustain the $48 million in cuts we've already made. We're going to sustain that. As we've indicated in all of our briefings and in our budget workshop, we're going to draw down our fund balance by about $31 million. We think we'll have a fund balance in the neighborhood of 18% at the end of this year. When we draw it down for next year's deficit, we'll finish the year with a fund balance of about 12%. We're adding no new positions in fiscal year 10. We're just trying to manage those that we have. We're trying to preserve the revenue stabilization fund. We don't think we'll have to dip into it next year in fiscal year 10, but it looks like we'll be looking to dip into that in fiscal year 11, just so you know the timing of that. And this budget also contemplates that we'll start to put funds aside for the post-employment benefits. These are the health benefits that we have to subsidize for retirees, ostensibly through the state public benefit system. Some of the next steps that we'll be looking at, you're already aware, we briefed you that we're beginning to do the next series of program reviews. We can't, there's no time to rest, essentially. What we need to do as soon as this budget's filed, we need to begin our planning for what do we do in fiscal year 11 based upon this forecast. And some changes are going to have to be made, and we're going to have to look at reducing or eliminating some programs. Very close coupling with that is with the city manager's direction, we're looking at doing a citizen outreach program where we're looking at using UNLV to help us do some focus group studies and help us with the town hall outreach as we work through those decisions about what services or programs should be eliminated, and you'll be actively involved in that process. What we're doing, as we said before, we think we've gained about a year of time to do some additional planning, and there's still a lot of work to do, but there's some significant reductions that we think there's going to happen in fiscal year 11, and we're planning for that now. Also, we'd be looking at potentially some position freezes as we settle down with this next phase. We are still looking at controlling which positions we're selectively filling as they become vacant, and that's consistent with what we think we're going to be doing with the program review. So as we learn more about which programs we're recommending that may be downsized or eliminated, we'll strategically be looking at freezing some of those vacant positions as we go along. And of course, we're going to continue to have discussions with our labor unions about additional considerations and adjustments that may be necessary. To the extent we're successful there, it lessens the cuts that we have to have for services. To the extent that we're not, then obviously it's a zero-sum game for us. So those are our next steps. Just sort of a little recap here. While our total budget's been growing just slightly, in terms of percentage-wise, that growth is predominantly occurring in non-general fund areas. It's predominantly happening either in capital project funds that are coming from outside of the city for the most part, or from some of our internal service, or special revenue or enterprise funds. But you can see here, as far as our final budgets, while the final budget was $557 million, we're not going to come anywhere close to that this year. As I indicated before, we're going to have an underrun of about $48 million to that 557. So that gives you a picture about where we're at. Our population seems to be stabilizing. One of the other stats I had in the previous slide was that our new residents, as measured through driver's licenses, are down significantly. I think it was about 30% down.
Mayor Goodman.
Yes.
Mayor, please. I was going to ask that question, Mark, is how do we determine the population? I think you just answered that.
The populations are determined through demographic techniques, both by the state and locally. The technique is slightly different. I'm not an expert in that area, but we verify locally, and our planning office verifies the demographic numbers that are produced by the state demographer. That's where these numbers are coming from. The statistic we've often heard about the growth of new residents. A year and a half ago, we were talking about 6,000 new residents moving into the valley every month by virtue of the driver's licenses. There's still people moving into the valley, but it's closer to 4,000. So it's kind of interesting. I can't necessarily explain that very well, but there must be some exodus of people leaving the valley, particularly with construction jobs and the like. That's probably not picked up in that driver's license stat. So this is through demographers. As a picture recap, you've seen this many times. This is a pie chart showing where our revenue sources are. We've talked about the fact that over 80% of this are franchise fees, property tax, and consolidated tax, even to some extent are licenses and permits, are really controlled by state law, and you don't have a lot of control to increase those revenues. I'm not saying you would want to, even if you could, but the fact of the matter is we are a Dillon's Rule state, and you don't really have any control over these revenues. So as they shrink, we have to react accordingly. The interesting thing about this is I just point out the consolidated tax pie, which shows is at $215 million for 2010, at 43% of our budget. It wasn't that long ago, it was about three years ago, that consolidated tax was 53% of our total budget. So the area that we've taken the biggest hit over the last 3 years has been in consolidated tax. That's where our revenue losses have been the steepest.
All right, before you go on, if you could go back to that pie. This is a question for Ms. Fretwell. Does this particular exhibit reflect the activity that's taking place up at the legislature?
No,
Well,
it does not.
It doesn't really. Some of the list of bills with impacts that we shared with the council in briefings this week indicated a shift. For instance, there's a change in the administrative fee for collection of sales and use taxes at the state level. They changed it by 1%. So that's a percent right off the top out of this bucket, the red bucket on the screen. What we will do is when the legislature finally finishes their work, then we'll assess the financial situation. If necessary, we may bring an amended budget back. Ms. Falder and I have had some discussions about that already to this point. If there are changes that we can make minor adjustments and then wait out the year and then make final adjustments at the end of the year, we do that at that time. But right now it's so fluid, there's no way we can predict how much more the state plans on taking from us and how much will be impacted by it. So at this point, we just have to go forward knowing what we know now and wait for bills to pass and for the session to wrap up, and then we'll have a full assessment.
Okay, what I would like at that time, after the legislature is through, to have a comparative chart with this pie compared to the pie after they get through their excisions.
Well, and maybe the size, how big the pie is now versus how big the pie is going to be going forward.
That's what I'd like to see.
Okay.
Thanks.
Sure, we'd be happy to do that.
Thank you.
Mayor Goodman?
Yes.
Betsy, in relation to that, will we be coming back with a subsequent budget hearing should that pie decrease?
If I may answer that, Mayor, we won't have another formal budget hearing. This is the budget hearing that's set by statute that we have to have on this third Tuesday in May. To the extent that the impacts are necessary for us to revise the budget, we can come back to you. We can, at a council meeting, we can present to you what those changes are. We can file an amended budget. At this point, as Betsy said, it's hard to tell what the final outcome. What I know about today and what we briefed you on, or are briefing you on this week in terms of the impacts we've seen so far. The only one so far that would have any impact on the general fund directly is that extra 1% admin fee, which would be a 1% impact on the $215 million. So this is about $2 million loss that we would have there. Is that in and of itself significant enough for us to have an amended budget? Probably not. But if there are other things that happen between now and the end of the session, or God forbid, a special session, then we'll have to take that as it comes, and there very well may be a reason to come back and amend the budget.
We're in a very unique position because you meet every 2 weeks. We can come back and we can bring our actual data on a regular basis and can adjust our implementation of the budget that you adopt as we go along. And then, depending on how drastic things are, if we needed to amend the budget, we have the option to do that. I think we typically try and reserve that option for when we really, really need to do it. As Mark mentioned in one of his earlier slides, we're still trying to position ourselves for the general downturn in the economy that's been sustained for quite some time now. We would continue to use those tactics and those efforts throughout the course of the next year to respond to any erosion in the revenue source, whether it be legislative or economic, or if there was some disaster that we had to respond to. So we're trying to be flexible and adaptable. The other thing that could happen is if there was a major erosion of funding sources and it compromised our contracts, for instance, because close to 75% of what we spend each and every day out of this organization is payroll. Then that could tee up other options as it relates to current negotiations and future negotiations based on our ability to live up to that contract if there's continued legislative erosion into our resources. So we're very mindful of all those things, and we'll keep you informed on a regular basis. And if we need to take a more final approach, like an amended budget, we would do that. We would work with you to bring that back to you at the right time with the changes that we discuss as a result of those final outcomes at the legislature.
All right, thank you.
And also remember that we had some parameters built in by policy that you approved last October on when we would revise our modeling, and that was a change of, if I recall correctly, it was I think it was 2%. I think it was 2%. So 1% wouldn't get us to that 2%. It'd have to be probably something else in the legislature. But again, this is going to remain a focus for us every month. You probably continue to get briefings from us every week about what's going on, so we're going to watch this very carefully. But the plan is right now to focus on what we need to do in fiscal year 11 to get us through the remainder of this and get us prepared for recovery. On the expenditure side, really nothing new there. This represents the staffing levels that we have brought ourselves down to. As I mentioned before, this is about, I think it's about 2,800 employees, full-time equivalents. It's about a 318 position reduction. This is what we're going into the final budget with. And as Betsy pointed out, about 75% of these services, or this $530 million, is labor and benefits. In a high-level basis, I just wanted you to look at the numbers in terms of the shortfall, the budget deficit. When we looked at our 5-year model, we knew that we had a situation here where our revenues are less than our planned expenditures. And so in order to accommodate that, we are going to draw down our ending fund balance from 2009 into 2010 by about $31 million. The model, as adjusted for the revenue, the changes that we made from our Financial Review Committee, coupled with the forecast on our expenditure growth based on the actions we've taken to date, shows that we're looking in the neighborhood of about $270 million in shortfall over the next 5 years. The shortfall for years 11, 12, 13, and 14 are closer to the $55 to $60 million range, and so that's another 10%.
So we were about, we started saying we're going to be $150 billion short after 5 years. Now you're saying 270? So we made a $120 million mistake?
I don't think we made a $120 million mistake, but we certainly, the economy has continued to surprise us.
And I was being a little facetious there.
Yeah.
Not a mistake, but we were that far off on our prediction as to what would ultimately take place.
It's been significant. It's been significant.
It's amazing.
I wish.
No, it's just amazing. And I'm not faulting anybody. I'm just saying to be that far off in our prognostication based on what has happened in the economy is just, as you said, it's unprecedented in our lifetime, and I'm older than you.
And to be brutally frank, from my own perspective, I probably was a lot more optimistic about recovery 12 months ago, as was our Financial Review Committee. We were all more optimistic about recovery. We're not so optimistic now. We know we're recovery, but we're not optimistic it's going to happen next year or very soon, or that it will be a sharp upturn. We're a lot more guarded about it now. So, if that's a mistake, then that's a mistake.
As I say, that perhaps is a mischaracterization. It
I
was just
appreciate that.
we were off base as far as the prognosis.
I think the other thing that's worthy of note is that we were very fiscally conservative on the expenditure side of things over the last year, which really saved us. Had we not eliminated 318 positions, basically dropping our position numbers by 10%, dropping our budget by 9%, saving some money, creating that stabilization fund, and having that level of fund balance that's up on your screen, we'd be having a very different conversation today, and one that's playing out across this country.
Right, and we appreciate that, and we've expressed that time and time again as a council, and myself as the mayor, to the staff for having put us in this position. We are really in an enviable position in some very uncertain and unhappy times.
I think the other thing is that this is a 5-year rolling model, and so we've pushed 1 year behind us, and we've added another not-so-pretty year on the future. And as we've talked before, all of our costs are compounding, and so that number gets bigger until our revenues recover.
As an aside, when we're participating in this discussion, is the same discussion taking place up in Carson City with those who are representing us up there with the legislators? Do they know what we've done and how we've prepared for this and where we stand at this point in time?
I actually think we did a tremendous amount of work with many of the legislators prior to them going to Carson City. And I think that many of them understand the situation we're in and have given us credit for kind of managing through, if you will, to some degree over the course of the past year. Obviously, even when we were having those discussions with them prior to them being at the legislature, we were still hoping for recovery mid this year, and now we're saying we'll be lucky if it's recovery the end of next year. And they're looking at the same hole, but bigger, and with less flexibility throughout the course of the year to be able to adjust and adapt. Yes, we tell them regularly that we are in financial straits and that the services that we provide are local and they're important to our citizens and to our community, and that we are being fiscally responsible, and that we are trying to curtail services where we can curtail services when we need to do that with the least impact on the public.
Well, my message is we should be rewarded for that instead of potentially punished for it.
Well, I think although we've had some erosion, comparatively speaking to some of the other local governments in the state, ours is probably lesser. And I think to some degree that's maybe reflective of many of our efforts. Not that others haven't tried. Some of those other local governments are much more intertwined with the state than we are. And so maybe that's been able to help us a little bit because of our independence to some degree.
Thank you.
Mayor Goodman?
Yes.
Please. Mark, I understand from this discussion that a year ago you projected $150 million over 5 years as a shortfall, and that was a prediction, a forecast, if you will, and you couldn't tell for sure. And now a year later, we're at $270 million. I guess my question is this. Should we act looking into the future over the next 4 years, recognizing that there's a $270 million deficit, if you will, based upon what you think is going to happen today, or should we be a little bit more conservative than that and act in even more conservative fashion? How would you rate that projection of $270 million as a shortfall over the next 4 years, correct? Would that be a conservative estimate?
That's a 5-year. It includes this $30 million, and
Okay.
I just point out that the 150 was $30 million a year for 5 years. I was right about fiscal year 10. I was just wrong about 11, 12, 13, and 14. But to your question, I think it's a fairly conservative estimate. I was surprised I was a little bit surprised that our Financial Review Committee thought that our property tax would drop another 10% in fiscal year 11. That surprised me a little bit. But and talking through it and thinking about it, I think I've been convinced that that's probably a pretty conservative number. I would probably obviously I was a little more optimistic than that. It's just hard to answer that question directly. What we are doing and what we have been doing, everything that Betsy's just said, is we still have managed conservatively. And maybe we've been a little more optimistic on our revenue forecast, but we've been managing conservatively. For example, what this doesn't show, it doesn't show the $50.2 million that you put into the Revenue Stabilization Fund that is protected from all actions other than what the purpose of that fund is for. We would have put more in there, and we had a bill to increase it by another $25 million. That didn't get out of committee. So we were always concerned that we might be punished for being managed conservatively, and I haven't quite seen that happen, but there have been some shots across the bow that indicate that some feel that some of these excess funds could be used for other purposes, and so we've tried to manage very conservatively. We've tried to be prepared. What I like about our current plan, and particularly when we talked about the next steps, was that the more that we can plan through and think about what our reaction is going to be to this, the better our decisions will be. I'd hate to be in a situation where just to react, we say, well, let's just cut another 5% out of the budget. We don't have time, given the constraints of our season here, to do that effectively and correctly, and I think we need time to do that. So what we've done, as we said before, we're using $31 million of our fund balance to buy us some time, but that's time I think is going to be well spent, and I think the product that we'll have out of there in our plan of action for fiscal year 11 and beyond will be much better because of it. So my personal opinion is we need to stay this course and spend the extra time we had not resting in our laurels, so to speak, and say what a fine job we've done so far, but the plan for really what we need to do in 11, 12, and 13, and that's probably not a direct answer to your question, but it's the best I have.
Well,
I'd like to just add a couple of comments, if it's all right, Mayor and Councilman. We've already begun to lay the framework and the foundation for getting to that next level of expenditure reductions. We anticipate in this model that we need to, over the course of the next year, identify somewhere between $25 and $50 million worth of savings that continue to give year in and year out. I've asked the directors to help identify between 2 and 5% in cuts across the board. That is around $25 to $30 million. And that's not easy. It's a heavy lift on their part. It's a heavy lift on our employees' part. And I think that we need to do that deliberately and with accountability. Because I don't see how we can go that much further into our operations without having an impact on our citizens. And above and beyond that, it would require additional discussions with our labor unions for the rest of that. And then that 270 starts to get manageable for us. We start balancing in that fourth or fifth year. We don't spend every penny we have in every one of our savings accounts. Do we spend a lot of it? Absolutely. But we could do it in a reasonable and responsible way. Actually, the mayor and I had a long conversation about this a couple of weeks ago because he said, Betsy, why are you bringing a budget that doesn't cut the expenses back now? Wouldn't that be better? And I said, well, if we bring a budget to you that cuts the expenses back now, we would be bringing a layoff list of well over 200 people. And our organization and our community is not ready for that. particularly when we have money in the ending fund balance, that helps us have those discussions about community impacts so that we're not sending shockwaves through our community. It also gives us a little time to recover. You know, it could be that things do start turning around quicker than we anticipate. Not sure, I'm not holding my breath, but it gives us time to do it well and to do it deliberately and to understand the impacts of the decisions that we're making as an organization. And we can afford to right now. We may have to do it quickly, but we can afford to right now.
And I appreciate that. And if I may, the second part of my question is, I fully recognize that we have limited control over revenue raising. The state controls in many ways the streams of revenue we receive, but we do have control in certain categories. Do we consider ways to raise revenue? Now, the last thing we want to do is be taxing people who can't afford to pay more monies. But I notice one of our categories for general fund revenues is fines and forfeits. $23 million, that's about 5% of our budget. Could you break that down a little, Mark, and tell us what those are, who is paying for those, and is that something that we should explore? And I'm just kind of shooting from the hip here, just talking out loud. I know we can't control too much of what we receive, and I know we're talking so much about cutting back on expenditures, but should there be some exploration of raising revenues in areas that aren't going to tax the business person or the average taxpayer, but those that should be paying extra? So where does that category come in first, Mark?
Councilman, that category is predominantly courts, so that's court fines and forfeited bail. And in fact, that is an area that has actually seen some increases. The traffic court that project that we brought forward to you seems like a year ago. Although it added some additional court costs, the revenues have far exceeded that, and so that's been a positive.
And if I can just interrupt right there, I see Mr. Carmody sitting in the audience. Mayor, with your permission, could I have Jim come up real quickly just to confirm that a new program that Mr. Carmody, I think, brought to us, the Traffic Master, is paying for itself and generating a positive cash flow. Is that right?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, Council, to date, through April, the municipal court has increased its fines and fees we're now 20% above our costs. So we have raised about $5.5 million more than we have spent at the court. Last year at this time, we were at $900,000 above expenses. So, and we have reduced expenses, so there is that piece as well. We've reduced expenses about 10.3% at the court, and that is primarily labor costs. But we have focused extensively on individuals who have been fined, responsible for paying those fines. We are struggling with the same thing that everyone in the community is struggling with. We have individuals that have traffic citations that are not working, unable to pay. We're placing those individuals in our work program. Our work program participants have increased, I don't have that number right on the top, but substantially. Those individuals, about 70% of them are working in city programs where they can assist the city in areas where perhaps we need additional labor. But yes, we have focused, and the traffic commissioner has been an integral part of that. There have been many other pieces that we've implemented with staff to pay attention to making sure that people do take care of their obligations if they have been found guilty or have committed a traffic offense.
Would it help if you had another traffic commissioner?
I don't believe so.
We're not ready for that?
Yeah, there's that issue of how many more costs you add to get more revenue. I think there are a number of steps we can take and are planning to take to enhance revenue. Many of those are leveraging the technology that we're implementing this year with the new case management system. But basically, it is a matter of holding those individuals accountable who have been found to owe money. And that's where we've really made our biggest gains this year and where we intend to make additional gains next year. I don't think an additional traffic commissioner right now is necessarily the answer, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I guess, Mark, just to conclude this area is, are there places that we can look to raise more revenue?
Mayor, through you, yes, and as I mentioned earlier, we've got two bills we're introducing tomorrow. One has to do with trying to be more conscious of the special extra services that we would provide, whether that be a speedier temporary privilege or regulatory license, or having to go out and do repeat inspections for failed inspections. We're asking you to allow us to raise additional fees for those. Some of those cost recovery type items could generate as much as $1 million a year for us. There are other areas where we have business fees, some processing fees that we haven't raised for quite a while, and we're asking that maybe those to be raised. That I don't want to get into the details of that particular bill, because one of our commitments to the community was that while we're introducing the bills tomorrow, there's a lot of work, there's a lot of community work that we need to do with the business community. The Las Vegas Chamber of Commerce, for example, has been helping us work through some of that. There are some changes and adjustments we've agreed that need to be made to those bills, so those bills will be coming back with an amended bill before the recommending committee would take action on that. But that is an example of some efforts. We're also looking at some of our off-site permitting, and we're working on a bill to deal with that as well. So there are places where we can. The difficulty, of course, is exactly as Jim just said. It's a tough time in the economy to be raising fees. It's one thing to have someone who's either committed an offense or has not been responsive to an inspection and say they should pay for that extra cost. Most of us kind of say, yeah, the people that are responsible for their own actions should pay something for that. But some of the general fee increases, I think, is a very sensitive issue, and I think we need to have a discussion about what we committed to you last October was we would bring some ideas forward, and we have in briefings, and say these are some ideas, but they're not all going to be palatable for several reasons, but the biggest one is economy is hard on everybody.
Mark, what about those situations where we've had through Mr. Harson's, the nuisance properties? Mm-hmm. I think a year and a half ago or so, we started levying some pretty good fines. Mm-hmm. I mean, thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars, and those homes are liened. Have we seen any revenue from anybody coming in and wishing to turn that property, and then they go to the recorder's office and they see the lien and they have to satisfy the lien? Have we seen any revenue from those situations?
I don't know that I don't know that we've seen any substantial increase in revenue, and we have seen some other in a few isolated cases, and I'm hoping it's not going to be a trend, but we've seen some isolated cases, some situations where someone may pick up that property with all those liens on them, and now it becomes a problem, and that the cost of paying off those liens is going to impact their ability to get that property rentable or saleable. We know from some newspaper reports that we've seen in other cities where they maybe have gotten too punitive, where even some financial institutions or banks have walked away from property because those kinds of penalty fines were substantially more than what they felt that they could get out of the property. So we still have to balance. I mean, again, we started this off by saying this is kind of a strange, difficult time, and so we've got to balance those punitive fines and penalties with people's ability to pay. You just heard Jim talk about, Mr. Crummy talk about the fact we've got a lot more people now in the work program because people can't pay a traffic ticket. So it's difficult.
Mr. Harson?
Steve Harson, Director of Neighbor Services. Give you a little bit of information on the civil penalty aspect. We've been receiving some checks from some banks as they've been trying to foreclose or move their properties. So there's been a few instances where we've had some banks provide payment for, let's say, a $35,000 penalty or a $65,000 penalty. I think the last council meeting, as you saw in some of the bigger ones, we have some banks or properties trying to come back and work with us, those we do bring back before council to reconsider.
Mayor Goodman, if you don't mind. You just gave us a couple of examples of actual banks that have come in and realized that there's a big lien on the property and written us checks.
Yes.
Well, that's fantastic. I mean, we're certainly getting somebody's attention, and I think the message should be that we're not unreasonable people up here. You know, sometimes we impose pretty hefty civil penalties, but if they come in and show us good faith, I think that we'd act in a good faith manner back and perhaps modify the amounts. But that's pretty good news that
It has been.
the message we're trying to get out is working, and some of these banks are coughing up the money and writing checks.
Yes.
Now, those monies go into the general fund?
Yes, they would. And in some cases, and as I think Steve was starting to make a reference to, we are actually discussing other ways that things that we could do. What we want is we want these properties brought up to code, made presentable, and we want people living in them. We don't want them vacant. And if there's a way that we could transition a fine or penalty into getting that objective done, then that's maybe something we need to talk about. And so we've begun to have some conversation about that on the side, because to us it's not so much about collecting the fines and penalties as much as getting the property up to code and filled with somebody in there paying rent or purchasing the house and paying their mortgage.
And
Can
let
we-
me
can we-
clarify, that's just the penalty portion,
Yes.
not the actual cost, but the
Yes.
penalty portion we
I
bring
mean,
back.
perhaps we can condition
Yes.
a reduction in the amount of the penalty
Yes.
on them certainly rehabbing the property, and I don't know how we do it, but making sure that people are actually living in the property.
We're having discussions about that.
Very good. Thank you.
Moving on to the capital improvement program, we did brief you on the capital improvement program and its totality, including some of the projects in the redevelopment area. I want to tell you that again, our focus on the capital program was maintaining, obviously, our current assets. We did have some projects that were partially funded. We did have some projects that had closed out, that had some balances left in those projects. We were able to reprogram that and fully fund some of the projects that were partially funded. And we're also focusing on some projects with some minimal impact. I know that there was a few projects that we added on, and there's some discussion about what's been happening at the legislature, particularly with the amendment to AB 304, what impact that might have to our capital plan. As I stand in front of you today, I don't think that amendment is going to have any impact on our capital plan. If it were to have an impact, and again, we until the session's over, we're not quite sure what that is, but based on what we understand today and some of the calculations that we've just done even as recent as last night, we may be able to meet our commitments on that amendment in AB 304 for the S Street reopening, at least the design portion of that, without impacting our 5-year capital plan. If there were to be an impact, we would have to go back and look at some of the projects that we identified as the West Las Vegas plan, and that would likely be where we would go back to revisit it. But as I stand here today, I don't think there's going to be, what I know about today, I don't think there will be any impact on the plan as we've briefed you so far. So the projects that we've talked about that we've funded, I think we're good with those. In a larger sense, we're still looking at about a little over $600 million in capital project expenditures for next fiscal year. It's about the same as it was last year in terms of size. You can see the vast majority of what we're doing here is still in parks and leisure and road and flood. Both of those categories have a significant funding source from outside the city. It's either in the local agreements from the RTC and the flood district, and a significant portion of the parks and leisure is still Southern Nevada Public Lands Management Act money, so that's outside sources. But obviously we as a city do have quite a bit going on. I think it's still a good position for the city to be able to continue on with these projects. These projects, at least in the construction phase, are generating jobs for the people that are working on these projects, so it's still important.
Have we factored in any stimulus money?
Not yet. Well, there's a little bit. Yeah, I should say no. There is some. We've got about, for example, one of the things we're funding in here is about $5.5 million in sustainability projects. A lot of that's coming from our sustainability special revenue fund, where we're setting aside a percentage of our franchise tax on electric bills, but some of that also is grant money as well. So there's a little bit, but the things that we know about already are in here, but it's not the bulk of.
Have we received any stimulus money?
I don't believe we've received any yet.
That's why it's stimulus money, I guess.
I know that for a while they've been setting up regulations, and there's the NSP money, which you got the report on, which might be considered stimulus money. There's another wave of that going through that Mr. Harson and the Neighborhood Services Department are working on putting together grant applications for that. So assuming we get approval, then there should be some money flowing from that. I know it's a matter of time before Jorge starts seeing some of the roadway monies. I don't know, did you get a check?
Not yet. Jorge Cervantes, Director
It's
of
in the
Public
mail.
Works. There's about $10 million of roadway projects coming to the city. There's some stewardship agreements that we have to enter in with NDOT, who is really the partner for FHW to distribute that money. That's in process. Those bills will be coming for you for approval of those agreements. Then there's some competitive money that we're going after. Some of the stimulus money we're not getting direct, but we're partners with the RTC. There's about $45 million that the RTC is getting for a commitment in the city, building the downtown transportation center, the Boulder Highway BRT project. Those are all projects we're partnered with, but it's going through the RTC. So we're getting about a $55 million impact in roadway improvements out of stimulus project, and there's some CDBG money that we're also using for facilities that's coming on its way too.
Do you know whether the RTC, I'm on the RTC, I should know the answer, but do you know whether they've received actually received the stimulus money?
They have not. Again, you got to go through a bunch of paperwork through the FHW and the FTA, and so that's all in process.
Mayor,
Thank
one
you.
of the items that's on your agenda for consideration tomorrow is a law enforcement grant, justice assistance grants, and those we anticipate receiving funding for in July.
Okay, good.
So those will probably be the first ones we really see.
Good, thank you.
And Betsy, Mayor,
Yes.
and Betsy, you bring up those 2 points. How much of an impact to the budget would that be, roughly?
Well, what it does is, for the most part, many of these grants get used on project-type issues instead of us adding staff to accommodate them. At least that's the way we've been pursuing them. Although oftentimes the grant monies do help defray the cost of administration or implementing the grant, and we try and take advantage of those. Not unlike we do with CDBG administration, and we can take about 20% of that and set it aside for administrative costs, which we do. We will pursue that with each grant. But for the most part, what this does is it helps us get things done. For instance, some of the stimulus energy projects that we were talking about are creating solar shade structures for parking lots. So we will be able to create jobs in the community by doing that, or having our own employees busy building those facilities. And then you're going to see some energy savings over time as a result of those being installed. But seeing an immediate impact to the operating side of our budget, probably not very significant. But we can certainly track that for you as we go along so that you're aware of how much the grant funds are impacting the operating side of the city's budget. Primarily, you're going to see it on the capital project side.
Thank you.
I think I better read this into the record, the next item, if we're talking about the RDA.
Yes, the RDA.
All right, item number 5. This is the public hearing and possible action regarding fiscal year 2010, City of Las Vegas Redevelopment Agency tentative budget, and fiscal year 2010, City of Las Vegas Redevelopment Agency final budget. It's a public hearing, which is now open. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor. This is the RDA operating budget. This does show about a 10% decrease in tax increment revenues for next year. This is I believe, a fairly conservative estimate. This is the estimate that we got from our consultant when we were trying to sell our RDA bonds a few months ago. It shows the affordable housing set aside. The impact for fiscal year 11 wouldn't change. It may be affordable housing and education, but it'd still be the same number for next year because it's still capped at 18% for next year. So the net increment with the RDA is a little over $18 million. You can see that a significant chunk of that's now going to debt or obligation related. That does include TIF notes. It includes the Union Park notes. It includes debt service on the commitment we made for the Performing Arts Center, for example. And operations is a little over $6 million. We are running a deficit in this situation. Some of the debt service will tick down slightly, almost $1 million in a few years out, but the RDA does have a fund balance. Most of that fund balance is going to projects, a lot of the West Las Vegas projects and a few of the other projects like their VIP program, TELUS commitments and things of that nature. This budget, we also have a 5-year forecast with the RDA as well. We use it for planning purpose to size how much of our interfund loan commitment that the RDA would be able to make for the Performing Arts Center. So this budget is, I think, over the 5 years is still really close to the line. At least it's closer to the line that the city's general fund is.
Mayor Goodman?
Yes.
Mark, how does, what is it, AB 458 play into this in relation to what that bill states in regards to the 5-year versus a 12-year reduction for the increase to education from the RDA?
Mayor,
Yes.
members of the council, Councilman Barlow, as you're well aware with all your involvement in this bill, the bill originally anticipated having about a 5-year phase-in of adding 3% of a set-aside beginning next year for education.
And that's at 3%, correct?
That would be at 3%. So, by about 5 years from now, you'd have 15% set aside for education, and you'd still have 15% set aside for affordable housing.
Affordable housing.
Right now, we have 18% set aside for affordable housing. So the bill has been modified based on, I believe, a lot of feedback and communication with Speaker Buckley, whose bill this is, regarding the impact on the RDA, and also broadening the impact of changing the educational set-aside and the affordable housing set-aside now, immediately, to help fund some of the state budget shortfall. But basically what the bill would do at this point is it would drop the affordable housing set-aside to 15%, and then it would step up the educational funding by 1% over the course of the next 12 years. And thereby it helps us get through these first few years and gradually steps in the educational component over time. So it's much more manageable for us. And then that way we have an opportunity as a state to see how that works. And there may be modifications that may be considered in the future depending on the success of that educational set-aside and the affordable housing set-aside.
So in essence, 18% is currently where we are with the affordable housing today. It will reduce the affordable housing from 18% to 15%.
Right.
So my question is, where's education at right now in regards to
It'll be
that formula
3%.
It would
today?
go to 3 immediately, and then it would go 1% for
Right.
each year after that until it got to 15. So 12 years later, you'd be up to 15% for the educational set-aside.
What is it today?
Zero.
Today it's 0. Under the new bill, it will
It'll be
increase up to 15 or 18%?
It'll increase to 15 total,
15 total.
and this year it would start at 3. So it's basically a 0 impact on the RDA budget in the first year of implementation, because there's a reduction in the set-aside for affordable housing by
Right.
3% and an increase in the educational set-aside by 3%, so it's a 0.
Mhm.
And then for each year after that, affordable housing will stay at 15.
Correct.
There will be a 1% increase in the educational set-aside for 12 years until it reaches 15%.
So what's decreasing by 1%?
Nothing.
Nothing?
Well, the revenue, the net revenue, the net
Something
revenue,
has to be decreasing.
Well,
the net revenue to the RDA will decrease by
Okay.
1%. And over the 12-year, I did sort of a back of the envelope calculation, assuming no growth. If we were to stay at around $24 million over the next 12 years, that phase-in would cost us about I think it was $12 million, if I remember my calculation right, over the next 12 years.
So in essence, the
on
net
average.
revenue on average for the RDA will be reduced
Yes, sir.
by 12 million roughly.
12%.
I'm sorry?
By about 12%.
By about 12%, and education will increase.
Right.
Okay.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Yes, I've been sitting here listening to these comments and questions and the presentation and stuff, and I guess I've always been an optimist, but I'm more of a pessimist now. And we're in court right now, and we don't know what the culinary union is going to do to us. And we can make all the plans in the world, and just like with the legislature up there, we have no idea what we're going to be tomorrow. None, zero, zilch. And we got our staff has been telling us what we can do, what we're going to be and stuff. And I just look at it, and we may be bankrupt in the next month or so. Well, it's a possibility. We're in court, the legislature, what they're trying to do to us. To me, it's just amazing what they think they can do, what they think we have, what they're trying to do to us. And if the culinary union wins, we get that on the ballot. We could lose our redevelopment agency. Thank you.
And just wrapping up a little bit, I just wanted to have an obligation to let you know that the taxation department did accept our tentative budget. And again, as I've explained, that the final budget will look just like the tentative budget, with some possible revenue adjustments, but the expenditures will be the same. Our Citizens Priority Advisory Council did meet on May 15th. They did do a budget policy review, and just for the record, I'd like to submit this to the clerk. They did approve the policies unchanged, and of course that's conditioned upon your already suspension of the 12% fund balance that was in our policy down to 10% during this recession recovery period.
How does the Citizens Priority Advisory Council work?
It's a committee of citizens that you each appoint your own. Does not necessarily have to be within your ward, but are at large in the city, have to be residents of the city. And we meet with them periodically, usually during the budget cycle, to brief them on here's what the budget the situation is. Pretty much the briefings that you have gotten. And we look to them for some advice and guidance from their perspective as citizens, and most of them to some extent have some business acumen or some financial experience, and so they provide some feedback, say, yeah, this is a good approach you're taking, or no, try this. We've also used them at times, particularly during legislative sessions. I don't know that we did that this year, but we've also used them as much as possible to inform them of what's happening at the legislature, the financial impacts, and the impact that's going to have on our budget process. Many of them are active in their local communities. They may be on homeowners associations, and so they can act as ambassadors, if you will, for us as well. That's a committee that we try to meet on a quarterly basis. There's not required that we meet on a quarterly basis. Sometimes we don't actually keep to that schedule, but during the budget cycle, we're always meeting with them to have them just additional oversight, if you will.
All right, thank you.
And that concludes my presentation. I don't know if there's any other questions you have that I didn't answer, or a direction you wanted to give us.
Okay, let's. Are there any questions or comments from the council at this time? Any questions or comments? All right, folks, a public hearing, if anybody would like to be heard.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor, Council. Teddy Russell, resident of Las Vegas. Pardon my beach attire. I had no idea that I would be here. I agree with the projections that they're utilizing in time. I do not subscribe to the theory that we will have an upturn in late 2010. I think it'll be late 2011 at the earliest. I also tend to agree with the Mayor Pro Tem's analysis of being in court. I don't have the time to give you my analysis of what the Supreme Court is going to do, but hopefully they will find for the greater good for all, and that this will not be the problem that ostensibly it could be. I also want to say that overall the market is discounting by 1 year in valuation, never mentioning the possibility of any catastrophes, disasters. For example, it's elementary geology. Every year we don't have a major earthquake in the United States, and it's been ever so long. It's going to be that much more drastic, a superstorm, et cetera, et cetera. I wanted to commend the city manager and all those involved on their timing. It's always difficult to know what is too conservative. I think the idea at the end of 2012 is a definite positive upturn for the city of Las Vegas is very correct. Thank you very much and have a good day.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to be heard at this time? All right, seeing none, we'll close the public hearing. May I have a motion on item 4, please?
Yes, Your Honor. Yes, Your Honor. I would move to all staff's recommendation of adoption of the fiscal year 2010 City of Las Vegas final budget, including the 5-year capital improvement plan as amended with the guidance from our city council.
All right, thank you. Let's vote on that, please. Wait. Opposed? I think I did it. Motion carries. And item number 5, please.
It would be the same motion, Your Honor.
All right, let's vote on that, please. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. All right. This is the time for council agency member recognition. Would any member of the council or the agency wish to speak under this portion of the agenda?
Yes,
Yeah.
Mayor.
All right.
You know, I just want to thank staff. I look out in the audience and I see some of our employees out there. I just want it to be known that we're doing our best. We're trying hard. I want to thank Betsy and her staff for what they do for us. It's tough times, and I've always felt like when times get tough, the tough get going. So we just got to keep fighting the battle.
Councilor Bartlett?
Yes, Mayor Pro Tem put it just perfect. So I want to ditto his comments, but also I would like to state in Councilman Ross' absence, would like to commend him on a job well done with the Eldorado Rodeo this past weekend, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. It was a great event, and also the Cultural Affairs Department and Esther and the entire city staff that participated in the Eldorado. It was a really great event, and everyone, all of the participants, vendors, everyone who had anything to do with the rodeo was a great success, and congratulations and thank you for the opportunity of bringing it to the downtown Las Vegas.
Thank you.
Yes, Your Honor. Just one other thing also. I would just ask that city staff and just remember Councilman Tarkanian in your prayers. Her dad is really ill this morning, and she had a hard time talking to me this morning. So let's just give her a big prayer.
All right, thank you for that. I'd like to once again reiterate the thanks to the council, not only for the budget hearing as we heard it today, but what led up to it with all of the efforts to guide us through these very challenging times. I think that the staff really deserves an awful lot of credit. You recognized problems before perhaps anybody else did, and you took advantage of the time lapse in effect before we really were hit to put us in a position where we're able to withstand the blow. I am more optimistic than Mr. Vincent. I deal with anecdotal experiences and not necessarily empirical data when I make decisions, and I act viscerally, perhaps more than cerebrally. But I think we have bottomed out. I think that we're going to come back. All you have to do is go out on the Strip for Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and you can't get a table to play. You can't get next to the bar to drink, and nobody knows that better than I do. I really believe that we're on our way back, and I hope that in your conservative approach here, and I heard what our civilian advisors had to say, they're of your mind as presented today. I think we're going to get there a lot faster than
people are giving us credit for. I think Las Vegas will probably be amongst the first to recover from the recession because we are unique. We're different. I believe that the advertising campaign by the LVCVA will be effective, that people need to take a break. Cities all over America are going through these very processes that we went through today, and people are shaking their head and they're down, and Vegas is the place where you can come to and really get the cobwebs out. So I think we're going to be back a lot sooner than people think, and that's my message for the day. All right, we'll move on to citizens' participation. Citizens' participation. Public comment during this portion of the agenda must be limited to matters within the jurisdiction of the City Council and Redevelopment Agency. No subject may be acted upon by the City Council and Redevelopment Agency unless that subject is on the agenda and is scheduled for action. If anybody would like to be heard, please step up, give us your name, and we'll put the 3-minute timer on, please. All right. I don't see anybody, so...
Teddy Russell, come back up here. Let me see your T-shirt.
No, thank you.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Seeing none, then the special joint City Council and Redevelopment Agency meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much for being here today.